Well, good morning. We are so excited that you decided to come and join us today. We actually have a very interesting topic and very interesting group of speakers lined up for our discussion. Today we are going to be talking about an issue that really ultimately impacts about 21 million households in the United States. This is about a quarter of the U.S. population that relies on decentralized wastewater systems. We're going to be talking about an issue about how we can make these, particularly when many of these systems are located in rural, underserved community, and impoverished communities. So how can we make these systems more effective, more affordable, and help to make sure that everyone has access to the water and sanitation and services that they need. We'll start off by our colleague from University of Alabama, Dr. Mark Elliott, and we'll begin the discussion. Thank you.
All right, that's me from a while ago. You can see we have triplets. They were babies at the time, and then 2 older kids as well. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to talk, just to give a broad background to try to orient everyone as to the scope and nature of what we're talking about here, including a problem that's not widely understood outside of communities like this, which is the fact that we have many households in the United States and other high-income countries that have serious problems. They don't have safely managed wastewater sanitation, as it's termed in Global Wash. And many who have what would be considered basic or unimproved access. Okay, so there's a lot of evidence emerging, including some recent publications. My student Jillian and I published a paper with Drew Capone in Nature Water about the nature and extent of these shortcomings in the United States. It's now acknowledged that there's widespread use of what are called straight pipes, which is basically what it sounds like. It's a pipe out typically to the woods or to the backyard, of raw sewage in the ground. And just in Alabama, we estimate over 1 million gallons per day of raw sewage discharge onto the ground, which is incredibly striking when you think about a small pump station failure that leads to a 5,000 gallon spill. We'll make it on the news and into the newspaper, but that's, I don't know, a few minutes of what's going on every single day in some of these settings. Okay, so this is going to be hard to read, but it's in the Nature Water paper, and it's meant to map out how people are ending up with what we would consider unsafely managed sanitation. Okay, so 75% of people have a connection to a sewer system in the United States, 74% of households. That means we've professionalized the role of dealing with our wastewater, and people fulfill their obligation by paying a bill. Okay. About 25%, as Christopher said, are using an on-site system, or should be using an on-site system that should be permitted, okay? But we have problems with the land, okay, the geology, the high water table, the climate, raising groundwater tables that make it difficult for a conventional wastewater system to work, okay? When I say conventional on-site wastewater system, I mean a septic system, okay? There are advanced options, but many times those are way too expensive for the people. Oh yeah, and then we also have the unhoused population, both sheltered and unsheltered, and that's another big part of this population that doesn't have access. Okay, so what do you do when you have homes and a community outside of an existing sewer system? What are their options? Okay, there's basically 4 options, okay? And we're talking about one of these today, okay? But you can connect with the existing sewer system, typically with gravity sewer. That's now going for about $2.5 million a mile, just for the main, let alone, so think about the scale of that. I don't have time to go into it, but you can also do liquid-only sewer connection, okay? So each home has a tank that settles the solids, but the liquids go to an existing sewer. You can also have liquid-only sewer where every home has a tank, settles the solids, and then you have your own treatment unit, okay? These are good options. We're talking about this one, individual on-site systems, and right-sizing those systems. All right, yeah, so just to show you and remind you, if you don't know, how a typical septic system works. Solid settling, a distribution box just to evenly spread the liquid, it varies by state, and then a drain field in the ground So if you've got bad soil, like a shrink swell clay, and this thing gets wet, it seals up, and then the wastewater goes up instead of down, okay? Just to get everyone on the same page about some of the challenges here with septic systems. Okay, so with single home, they're often the most affordable. However, the local conditions can make them not work, okay? Like I mentioned, advanced engineered systems may require maintenance and management, okay? So if you use an aerobic system, you put oxygen in, you actually get a lot more solids. You have to pump the tank more frequently. So you think, oh, I've got an advanced system, I'm gonna be fine. No, actually, sometimes it requires more intervention. Because of that, you basically are turning the dissolved poop into more bacteria, and it means more solids settling out. Okay, wide variation in prices across the US based on conditions and local conditions and regulations, huge range. My brother in Colorado 15 years ago had to get a mound system installed. It was like $45,000. He said he priced it out 5 or 10 years later because somebody had to come and do some work. They said 75. Now it's like $100,000. I mean, it's crazy the level of inflation we've seen in these systems. Substantial increase in cost in recent years. In Alabama, they basically doubled since I started working on this about 2015. And then flow estimation methods and regulations can greatly exceed actual flow, which leads to over-design and a lot of extra money. Okay, that's it for me. Did I make it?
Oh my gosh, you have 3 minutes left.
Wow, I usually have the opposite problem.
What's causing the cost increases, do you think?
So I've asked some of the installers what's causing the cost increases, and they'll say things like, look, the load of gravel that I need used to cost this much to have it delivered, and now it's twice as much. So the chamber systems that are put in now, like the infiltrator style chamber systems, those cost a little bit more, but I think the labor and getting the backhoe out to the property are the biggest expenses that have increased. I mean, there's some in the parts, but yeah, tanks too are costing more.
Yeah.
All right, I'll hand it off to you, Steve.
All right, thank you. I'm not as well caffeinated, so I'm going to go a little bit slower. But we do have happy hour tickets for all of you who came, and it's right outside later on today. So we have a cesspool problem in Hawaii, and we have 83,000 cesspools, and we have the most per capita in the entire country. That's a little shocking for a lot of people. When they think of Hawaii, you don't think of cesspools. And our government would like to keep it that way, our state government, and the tourism authority. But thanks to us, they're having a hard time. We're like, we need to solve this problem. And when, Mark talked about the scale of the problem, we have, 83,000 that put out 52 million gallons of just untreated sewage every single day underground. The largest sewage spill we've ever had in Hawaii was in 2006, and that's what kind of got me motivated in this issue and it got me really involved. It was 48 million, so it's less than what we do every day, and it closed Waikiki, made international headlines. It was a huge, huge mess. So just to give you kind of the scale of the problem. And so right now we're doing less than 200 cesspool conversions a year. We helped pass a mandate to convert all cesspools by 2050. That means we need to be well over 3,000 a year. So it's just magnitudes of order higher. And so we're trying to figure out how to do this. It's a mixture of funding, policy, and what have you. I'm going to talk about the public health hazards, and especially with involving nitrates and some of the environmental hazards, with poor water quality, toxic algal blooms. And here's a trivia question for you. What's the only place in the country that has more cesspools than Hawaii? We have the most per capita. It's another island, and it's on the East Coast. Long Island and Fire Island. Sorry, it's pronounced Long Island. They have over 350,000. And so when we went to visit them, we saw what the nature of the problem was, and it was a cautionary tale for Hawaii. But this is the breakdown of where the cesspools are. We've designed, I was part of the cesspool conversion working group, and we met for 4 years, and we had 3 priority levels. but in priority 1, they're 13,000, in priority 2, they're 12,000, so it's almost 26,000 of the ones that have the highest priority that we have to make sure we convert, because they are kind of showing documented damage or suspected damage. And this is the breakdown across Hawaii. The Big Island has the most, and like Long Island, it was very similar. It was just rapid development, and sewage infrastructure couldn't keep up with the pace. And so what were supposed to be, temporary cesspools, these holes in the ground, as a friend of mine likes to say, it's like, imagine an outhouse and then take away the house. So everything just goes into this hole in the ground. With no treatment whatsoever. So that's the breakdown across Hawaii. And when we came into it, we were like, there's no other group that's focused on it. Our group is called VAI. VAI is the Hawaiian word for water, WAI, but it stands for Wastewater Alternatives and Innovations. And so we realized we had to kind of tackle it from a policy angle, from a financial angle, health, environmental, in every aspect. This is just kind of to show you what happens when all the waste goes into the cesspool. It percolates out the bottom. Sometimes you have tiles on the side, sometimes you have bricks and a cylinder column going down, sometimes it's just dirt walls. It's going down to the bottom, and it'll go into the groundwater. And so in one study that we did on the Big Island, this was fascinating to me. One of the largest housing developments in the entire country. The top 2 are in Hawaii on the Big Island. Can you believe that? In Hawaii. And there are thousands of homes, and one of the largest is Hawaii Paradise Park, has over 4,000 homes, and 50% of the private drinking water wells that they sampled had fecal indicator bacteria. And I was like, if that doesn't motivate them to change, I don't know what's going to do it. You have fecal indicator bacteria in your water supply. But then it continues percolating out, goes out into the environment through submarine marine discharges, groundwater discharges, and we have all kinds of public health images, problems that go along with that, through bacteria, parasites, viruses, and then the most important is nitrates in the drinking water. And this is what Suffolk County in New York really exposed to us. They have massive toxic algal blooms, and it will shut down a whole community. And you'll have massive fish kills, and it's just horrendous. And pets were dying when they were drinking the water. It was so infused with nitrates and all kinds of. You also get pharmaceuticals, contaminants of emerging concern, and so these are some of the other ones. We had our sea turtles, or honu, had these tumors, these fibropapillomas, I can't even pronounce that, papillomatomas, tumors that are related to these, invasive algal growth. And what this leads to is, just like nitrates on land encourage growth, they do the same in the ocean, and then you have this algal overgrowth, and it smothers and kills the reefs. Now, our reefs in Hawaii are like, we depend on them. They're valued at about $863 million per year just in fishing, recreation, diving, and then also just protection of our shorelines. And so we have some areas to show you how bad the problem is, where you've had 70% coral reef cover 70 years ago, and it's down to less than 7 or 5%. What that means is any storm surge that comes, it just crumbles into rubble. And so we're much more prone to sea level rise, storm surges, hurricanes, and tsunamis. And so it becomes a real issue that we're trying to solve. And so I'm going to get a little more into the solutions, but just want to kind of pose the problem. Any quick questions before we move on? Yes?
I'm just curious to learn, you said that 50% of the samples have fecal indicators.
Yeah.
What people are doing to treat not just the fecal indicator, the E. coli or torticolliform, whatever it is,
Yeah.
but also nitrate, because it seems to be like high level of nitrate in water.
Yeah.
So, and I believe that it's individual wells.
Individual private.
So private. So
Yeah.
do they have like a point of entry, point of use, water treatment system to treat for microbial, but not just microbial, the chemicals such
Right.
as nitrate and others?
I mean, it's really up to the individual homeowner. Some do, some have water purification systems in their homes. Some use chlorine, tabs, but it's really, yeah, there's no kind of prescribed system, for treating that and making sure that it's pure. And so that's another reason we're doing this, is because in Suffolk County, they realized that there were elevated rates of certain types of cancer, colorectal cancer that are associated. They have the highest nitrate in their drinking water rates in the entire country. They're I think number 3. And so that's the real cutting edge science that's being now. We can't say causation, but it's definitely correlation with very high rates of cancer due to these nitrates. The legal limit is 10 milligrams per liter, and everybody's saying that's way too high. That's the EPA standard. It needs to go lower, because even at 4 and 5, they're seeing really adverse effects. Yeah. So, all right, thank you. I'm going to pass it back to Chris.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about an issue that's impacting the plumbing industry, and then we'll kind of correlate it with how it's impacting the on-site and decentralized wastewater systems. So my name is Christopher Lindsay. I'm a Vice President of Government, Senior Vice President of Government Relations for IAPMO. It's the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials. Essentially, we're a 100-year-old trade association that's been an important voice in the plumbing industry, developing codes and standards that are used in the United States for how systems come together and throughout the world. We also help to educate and train the workforce, and then we test and certify products. We do about 95+% of the U.S. plumbing market. So chances are most of the shower heads, toilets, sinks that you've interacted with throughout the course of your day-to-day have all been tested and certified by IAPMO for lead content, flow rates, making sure they meet industry standards or federal and state requirements. There's been a trend going on over the last 20 years where in the plumbing industry we've come to recognize that we're grossly oversizing building and home plumbing systems. Now, if you think about it, going back to the early 1940s to Dr. Roy Hunter, I know it's a name you may not have heard of. It was a NIST researcher who came up with the original formulas for how we size water and sanitation systems in the United States. And essentially it was a brilliant formula, but as you can imagine, we use water differently today than we did back when Dr. Hunter came up with his formula. You can see some examples of some of the appliances. So not only were all the fixtures and the fittings totally different from what we find today in modern homes, but it was also designed similar to kind of like bathrooms like in the Super Bowl, that we'd be using all of these fittings at the same time, which you can think about even from your home experience. How often in the course of your day is every single faucet, every toilet, every shower, every tub on at the same time? But that's the way systems were designed, to be able to hold that kind of capacity and flow rate. And of course, this trickles down into then decentralized wastewater systems, thinking these are the kind of the loads that we should be expecting. And just to give an example of how water usage has changed over time. This was actually taken from a graph from a utility that recognized in the early 90s that, hey, we have a problem with our water usage, and essentially either we need to modernize our systems and adapt, or we're going to have to open up basically a new reservoir. And you can see just through a variety of steps that most actually utilities have taken and most homeowners have taken as we were building new construction. They've been able to dramatically reduce per capita water usage through a variety of different ways. So what does it mean though that we're oversizing these systems? Well, first off, there's extra costs. We heard about some of the price increases. So if you have to put in a much larger systems, the costs are just dramatically increasing, and this including in the plumbing just inside your home. It also deteriorates water quality as water sits in pipes a lot longer, and then there's also a higher pathogen risk because things are allowed to kind of grow as disinfectants break down and so forth. And today, just kind of show you how water usage just at the fitting level has changed since over the last 25, 30 years. You can see by appliances where flow rates used to be, where they are today. That's kind of what's mandated as the federal maximum flow rates. Water Sense and other programs go even lower. But you can see the dramatic cuts, anywhere from 50 to 75% at the fitting level. So we're just using much less water. So what's been done about this? The industry got together and using the latest data came up with new sizing requirements. And IAPMO is proud to take kind of the lead on this. And so you can see we call it the water demand calculator, kind of a new sizing formula and kind of methodology. But it's getting into the plumbing codes. States are recognizing it. We're up to like about 17 states that have now kind of, and communities that have like adopted this as an alternative sizing compliance, but more coming online. But there is recognition that we are grossly oversizing, these systems. And this graph really kind of illustrates kind of this in detail. So the top one is kind of like the bigger picture, and then you can see there's kind of the green call-out box, and that's the chart down below. If you were to follow the red line, as building units get bigger, and this is looking at multifamily just to show how dramatic this is, that would be the sizing of the system that would be required using Hunter's curve and traditional sizing methods. The dots, the black dots, are the actual peak flows for those systems. So you can see just how dramatic it is. And for many of these cases, we're oversizing systems by anywhere from 5 to 27 times, which is just incredible when you think about it. Thanks to this kind of alternative, sizing requirements or what we call right sizing plumbing systems, you can see. So the red dots would be the traditional sizing. The blue dots would be the new right sizing requirements, and the black dots are still the peak usage. So even with the right sizing, there still is an oversize, right? There's a safety factor that's built in. And as we continue to get new data continues to build, we're going to be able to continue to kind of help narrow that gap, but still make sure that consumers have the water and sanitation that they need. Of course, there are benefits to this. There's the cost savings. There's the water conservation. Think about it, when you go to get hot water, in your home, you really have two choices. You either let all that cold water run out until the hot water gets there, and then you've wasted all that water, or you start immediately washing your hands, and as soon as you're done, you're turning off the faucet, and then we're wasting all that energy because you just charged a system that you never really got to use, right? And so there are tremendous energy and water conservation, as well as the public health impacts that we talked about. So, with all this being said, if we're oversizing our plumbing systems, and we're building for this hydrologic load that really isn't there, this translates into what's going on at the single-family home level and what's with the state requirements for on-site systems, and how can we help to modernize those requirements as well. And so to help answer that question, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andrea, who's going to help us do that. So thank you. Any questions about the plumbing oversizing issue? Yeah.
Do you anticipate the pressure ratings then for your plumbing codes to go up if your flow velocities are going to increase if you decrease your pipe sizes? So.
Yeah, it's an issue that is being looked at. I mean, actually, they've done the math on it, and unfortunately, I'm not a technical person. I'm a policy person.
Okay.
But yeah, it has been addressed in the methodology. So, but I don't have the right answer for you.
No, I'll check it out.
Yeah, I can follow up with you afterwards.
Okay.
Speaking of prices, is there any type of financial program for low and middle income families that they need, they should update their systems to low flow fixtures? Is there any type of program to help those people to update? Because I believe there is a cost to update all the systems, like the old system to low flow fixtures. Is there any type of program to help them?
There are several. I mean, oftentimes when there's an intervention, such as like we're looking at putting in, let's say if a home that's been straight piping, and there's an intervention to come put in a new system to help with that affordability, or they do offer and they will install like low flow fixture rates. Utilities offer rebates, but really it's not so much the actual fixture level itself, It's the broader, like the system and the hydrological load, which you don't necessarily will replace in existing homes. Like, this is more of an issue as we look at new systems coming online, that we address this issue at that point, just because it would be cost prohibitive to go and tear out all your plumbing just to fix the sizing issue. But yeah, there are a number of programs, but not enough. We'd love to see greater market saturation of this. So, all right, turn it to you, Andrew.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Stowell. I work with LIXIL, who you may know best here in the U.S. through our American Standard, GROA, and DXV brands. And I'm going to talk today about how on-site design requirements are set and what they look like across the United States. LIXIL undertook some internal research. We cataloged on-site design requirements across every state in the United States. It's not published research, but I'm going to share some of those findings with you guys here today. We've already heard about the magnitude of the problem. More than 1 in 5 homes has an on-site sanitation system. We've heard about the exorbitant costs that come with that. For many homeowners in the United States, those costs are simply out of reach. And so the question has come to us, which is like, how do we make these systems cheaper? How do we make them more affordable? And right sizing is one of the topics that has sort of risen to the top as a alternative mechanism for rethinking how these systems sort of come to be. So how do design guidelines get set? They really do vary substantially across the United States. They are typically based on daily per capita flow rates. But then they get multiplied by this risk factor, and that risk factor is commonly 1.5. This is really to account for like Super Bowl Sunday type events, and it's a way for regulators to de-risk sizing. Based on our internal analysis though, like only 4 states stop there and say we're gonna size systems based on per capita, the number of people that live in the home. Every single other state in the United States then incorporates the second factor, which is the number of people that occupy each bedroom. The theory here being that your bedroom might be empty today, but your college student's gonna come home this summer and occupy it. Or maybe, just maybe, you're gonna sell your home down the road and every single room is gonna be occupied by 2 individuals. So in that, systems aren't really designed for current use. They're designed for some future state that may or may not come to be, which really places an undue burden on homeowners who are faced with having to install systems now. So how does this play out across the states? In 1980, EPA issued a blanket recommendation that systems be designed at 150 gallons per bedroom per day. I want you to keep that in mind because pretty soon I'm going to talk about what per capita indoor water usage rates are and how they've changed over time. What evolved though was a complete patchwork. 14 states adopted this recommendation outright, and they still maintain this recommendation today, nearly 40 years later. The rest of the states made modifications in one way or another. Some either increased or decreased their per bedroom flow rates, while others placed minimum bedroom requirements on the overall size, regardless of the actual number. So you see this start to play out in places like Minnesota or Mississippi and Pennsylvania, where systems have to be designed for a 3-bedroom home at 400 gallons per day. This is wildly oversized and can increase costs for homeowners substantially. So all in all, 22 total states have minimum design requirements greater than that 150 gallon threshold that the EPA set 40 years ago.
Maybe a quick question.
Yeah.
On that slide, those numbers at the bottom, they weren't per bedroom.
No, they were minimum thresholds. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And we're going to hear from Stuart shortly about what the design requirements are in Hawaii and what that means for conversion rates and affordability there. But states have been really slow to incorporate demographic and water usage changes into these codes. There are 3 states, North Carolina being one of them, that haven't updated their guidelines around this since the 80s or 90s when water usage in the US was at its peak. 3 states have, though, jumped out ahead. These are New York, Texas, and California, and they're now offering sizing discounts for homes with water-efficient fixtures, really paving the way for others to follow. But like I said, a couple of major things have happened in the past 40 years. One of them being significantly declining indoor water usage rates. And we really just care about indoor water usage here because that is the water flow that ends up in a septic tank. This is mostly a technology story, like Christopher said, right? Indoor water usage represents around 70% of a total household's water usage. And 60% of that is from toilets, faucets, and shower heads. So what we see here is a sort of a compilation of different data points, but as you can see, the year-over-year change is pretty substantial. And right around here is where low-flow fixtures start to enter the picture. WEF has released periodically in 1999, 2016, and there will be a new release next year of the residential water use study. That is beginning to give us really great insights, historical insights over how water usage is changing. I just want to call out this number right here. So Flume, who offers a real-time water meter for residential properties, collects data and reports out on it periodically. They did a survey of 15 cities in the United States, and they found that the highest using city consumed 47 gallons per capita per day. 9 of those 15 cities were well below 40. So we have made substantial progress over the past several decades. The other major factor here is that there has been an increase in the average number of bedrooms per home in the past 50 years, growing from an average of 2.5 rooms in 1970 to 2.8 homes in 2023. But there has been a declining number of people per household, falling from 3.1 people per household to 2.5 people per household. So as you can see, water use is going down, bedrooms are going up, per capita occupancy is going down. These are all the factors that drive on-site design requirements and that are going to continue to impact how on-site sanitation systems are used. So all of that to say, we need to revisit the science. And we need to do it for a lot of reasons. We need to do it because systems are unaffordable for homeowners, because the rate of conversions in places like Hawaii are not keeping pace with need. And we really need to go back to the drawing board and think about how these systems are being constructed. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn over to Tate Rogers now, who's going to talk about some of the emerging innovations in this space and why they necessitate, why they drive towards this same topic.
All right, sorry I've lost my voice, so I'll give it my best go here. My name is Tate Rogers. I'm the founder and principal at Triangle Environmental. We're a R&D and consulting company that focuses on on-site wastewater treatment and reuse systems. We're based just up the road here in Durham. So we're developing multiple technologies in the space, but today I'm not going to focus on any certain technology. In this conversation around right sizing for systems, obviously we're talking about a lot on traditional septic, but it's a very exciting time for innovation in the on-site space. And so in addition to right sizing, there's also matching the correct system for your specific use case. And there's a lot of new tools in the toolbox in terms of innovation. So I think everyone's kind of talked about this, but climate change is necessitating a lot of these updates. And I think I was talking to someone last night that it's not really an abstract thing anymore. It's coming to people's front door. And so it's interesting. We used to do a lot of international work, but now most of our work is focused here in the U.S. and actually close by. So we do a lot of work in the Chesapeake Bay. And Eastern Virginia is facing some of the worst sea level rise in the country because sea is coming up. They're also overdrawing their aquifers, so it's going down. Their land's going down. And so all these septic systems that need that, you need some dry soil for the treatment to work. That water table's coming up, they're failing. And so they need new ideas, and so we're piloting a few systems there that maybe don't rely as much on the drain field. There's also drought and precipitation patterns that are changing. They're driving the need for water use. Obviously, that's more in western states. We talked about a lot of nitrogen. There's nitrogen runoff is a big problem. Nitrogen and phosphorus leading to a lot of harmful algal blooms. It's killing fish. It's leading to a lot of issues really across the eastern seaboard. And then of course extreme weather, like the hurricane that just hit, or the Hurricane Helene in North Carolina that hit last year. There's this dependence on these centralized systems, and when they go down, you know, hundreds of thousands of people are losing access to clean water and sanitation overnight. So there's been a move towards distributed infrastructure. So I borrowed this figure from AOAG. I like it. So we're moving towards a completely rethinking how we think about domestic wastewater. I like this visual because, you know, generally we have thought about wastewater, everything goes into a pipe and that goes away and someone takes care of it. But we're moving to a space where towards more source separation, thinking about specific wastewater streams and how we treat those and how we can either reuse those on site or turn them into viable byproducts. So for instance, there's a move towards urine diversion. Sarah and I were just at a fun urine diversion conference in Cape Cod. We've been traditionally poop people, but we like the urine space as well. Where they're taking that urine, because urine contains more than 80% of the nitrogen in all of domestic wastewater, but it's less than 1% of the volume. So there's a huge opportunity if you can capture that at the source to either treat it on site or reuse it for fertilizer. Additionally, like black water, gray, and then even specific gray waters, you can think about those differently and depending on the reuse. So if you're going to like a non-potable reuse, you can do low-hanging fruit such as flushing toilets or irrigating your lawn, but you can also move towards doing laundry, dishwasher, and then more in centralized. There's I'm sure you've heard there's more direct to potable reuse coming, more in centralized systems. But you can imagine a future where that could happen at your home. So we need to rethink how we're thinking about wastewater and reuse on site. So what accompanies that is there needs to be flexible policies to support this innovation. I mean, especially like septic is a very traditional systems and it's very traditional policies that have been around for a long time. And so there needs to be thought around being able to fit policies for a local environment. And I don't mean even state. I mean, states can have dramatic differences between water usage and in the state. And so thinking about at a community level, making sure it fits the right environment for that home. Source separation and treatment, which I just talked about, there needs to be more and more permitting and certification pathways. IAPMO has a new greywater treatment standard, but they're even more so in terms of like thinking about source separating and being able to certify a system for a specific source separated stream. And then of course policies that are either mandating updates or ideally incentivizing move towards higher quality water treatment and reuse. And so there are exciting new policies that are coming around in that space, but they're playing catch up. And so I would say that there needs to be some thought about this at a national level that states can start to adopt. Last slide. This is, I think, an important, really important part as we think about on-site treatment systems and producing higher quality, and especially if we're reusing stuff on site. Regulators need to know that that's a safe water that's being reused. So there's a big paradigm shift in my mind in terms of operation and maintenance, and I added an M for monitoring that I saw someone present recently, and I stole that from them. But I think it's very important. So like I said, it's traditional, so we're moving away from this set and forget it. If you're thinking about a permit or a regulator with a traditional septic system, if they stamp a design for a septic system, they're thinking that no one's going to look at this again for 30 years, and so they have to be very conservative with how they approach that, because ideally the homeowner's pumping out their septic tank, but you don't know that. And so when you're talking to permitters, a lot of them actually they come from a good place, but they're thinking like no one's touching the system for 30 years. That's changing. If you have on-site advanced systems in producing higher quality effluent, you can't have that. You need to have proper servicing, 2 to 4 times a year. And what that allows you to do is, like, as from a regulation standpoint, it gives them more security to know that, like, okay, this system is being maintained and monitored properly. And as these treatment systems are moving towards more appliance-like system, there also needs to be an expectation that the homeowner needs to be more involved, and I think there's a huge need for behavior change around that. We've been very spoiled in the U.S., especially like where you don't have to think about where your water comes from or where your wastewater goes for the most part, but that's changing again. And then cost-effective monitoring. So as I said, if you're reusing stuff on site, a lot of the reuse, like when I go to the Water Reuse Summit, a lot of the conversations at the commercial and city level, and that's because monitoring is easier to do. But the same sensor that you need to monitor a building scale system is the same sensor you need at a home. So if you need to put a $10,000 TSS sensor at a home, that's obviously not sustainable. So there's organizations that are focused, that working groups that are focused on how do we think about monitoring at the home level and what risk is tolerable for a home level, and they need to think that differently from residential to commercial. So it's a very exciting time in the on-site wastewater technology space. I think you're going to see more and more companies and startups, and you are seeing that. So I think there's a large opportunity, but we need to also have all these other things, these considerations that are going to come along, and really on the policy level that will allow these technologies to have major uptake. So I'm going to pass it to my colleague Sarah, whose voice is also gone.
Yeah, sorry, I think it's going around the company. My name is Sarah Hennessy. I'm the wash lead at Triangle Environmental. I work very closely with Tate. And we've been talking a lot today about some of the cost implications of right sizing, but you're probably wondering, what's the scale of those cost implications to homeowners? Is it significant enough that we should implement this right sizing? And so we did a very small model study in partnership with LIXIL to look at how on-site systems, if they're right-sized, impact the overall cost to the homeowner. So we had 3 main research objectives. We wanted to understand how systems size on-site systems. So we looked at 4 different states. We looked at Alabama, Colorado, Hawaii, and Massachusetts. It kind of ranges East Coast to West Coast in the US, as well as states who are more progressive in their on-site sanitation policies and states who are a little less progressive. So they have higher gallon per day flows. Some had nitrogen requirements and weren't just looking at hydraulic loading. We wanted to estimate how water efficient devices could impact the overall system size, and we wanted to calculate how those right sizing changes influence the cost of the system to the homeowner. And so I won't go into this in detail because Mark already covered it, but for the purpose of time and this study, I just wanted to talk specifically about conventional systems, so septic tank systems. They consist of 2 main components. The first is the septic tank, where you essentially have a 2-day holding retention time for the wastewater coming out of the home. And the effluent from that septic tank drains into the second main component, which is your drain field, your leach field, your soil absorption site. Each state has a different term for what they call this. But these drain fields are essentially 2 to 3 feet wide trenches, and they can be 2 to 4 feet deep. They have gravel and perforated pipes that distribute the effluent into the gravel, essentially like biological filter, and then it absorbs down into the soil and eventually the groundwater. So we're not going to look at the advanced treatment systems today, just because of the lack of time. So what we found, as Andrea already talked about, states size their on-site systems based off of per bedroom or per person flow estimates. So Massachusetts was one of the more progressive states that used a smaller flow rate in the 110 gallon per bedroom per day estimates, whereas Hawaii, where Stewart works, uses that 200 gallon per bedroom estimate. So you can imagine how much that impacts the system size of the wastewater treatment system coming behind. For residential systems specifically, these 4 states use hydraulic loading rates to size the septic systems and not organic loading rates. The big difference between your conventional systems with your septics versus your advanced treatment units are your advanced treatment systems do size based off of organic loading rates because the manufacturers are judged based off of those organic loading rate reductions that they can achieve. The biggest factor affecting the cost of these systems was the soil percolation rates, and these vary drastically by site. So even within a county, you can have very different soils in different neighborhoods and from one neighbor to the next, and it had the largest implication in terms of the cost of these septic systems. So when we looked at the 150 gallon per day bedrooms that 14 of the states across the US used. We wanted to see what the sizing was from like a 1 to 5 bedroom household. On the left, this is the cost just for that first component of your conventional system. So that's your septic tanks. What we found is the range of cost for the septic tanks was in the like $100 to $1,000 range. And we found that septic tanks are typically manufactured in 250-gallon increments. And those costs range from about $300 to $550 per $250 increment, or 250-gallon increment. And we also found that most states had a 1,000-gallon capacity minimum that was required for every household, whether it was your 1-bedroom up to your 4-bedroom. Once you got to the 5th bedroom, that 1,000 regulation minimum increased actually. When you looked at the drain field costing, the second component of that conventional system, you can see that the scale increases to the thousands to tens of thousands range. So the drain field represents approximately 70% of that conventional system's cost. You are charged by your foot squared. The costs we found were around $14 to $17 per feet squared. I would say all the costing data we've used, we had a small sample point and data points for costing, so take that with a grain of salt. It's also going to be very dependent on your geography, but it kind of gives you the range of scale we're talking about. And so that average 3-bedroom household that Andrea mentioned, when you looked at all of the different levels of soil percolation rates, from your poor percolation to your good percolating soils, the costs for the drain field could range from $9,000 to $35,000 for those homes, for that 3-bedroom home. So what happens when we use water efficient devices? We input a 20% water efficiency calculator on, and that doesn't even really match the actual water usage, which is typically much higher, as Andrea already mentioned. But just taking off 20% of the hydraulic loading, you can see the blue bars are the regulation sizing. The orange bars on the left graph are for our right sizing calculations. What we found was with the septic tanks, there were kind of nominal savings just because it is a more minor cost component for these conventional systems. And those nominal savings would only be reached with those 1 to 2 bedroom homes because of that 1,000 tank minimum, if you could get that taken off as a regulation requirement. Those savings were really restricted by those 250-gallon increments from the manufacturers. When we looked at the drain fields, if you look at a 3-bedroom home with a moderate level of soil percolation rates, you could reduce the size of your drain field by 225 feet squared, which was essentially a 22% CapEx reduction in your drain field cost, which is around $4,000. So a significant price for especially these low-income consumers and households who typically use these types of systems. And when you add that to some of the plumbing savings in the home, that becomes much larger as well. So I'm gonna turn it over to Stuart to talk about some innovations in Hawaii.
Sure.
My name is Stuart Coleman, and I started an organization called BIO, as I mentioned earlier. It's a nonprofit dedicated to this issue, and I think, like all of us here, what I realize is I was working with the Surfrider Foundation for years, trying to solve all these very complex problems across the board, and for my nonprofit, I was like, let's try to solve one problem. And see if we can solve this, what is for Hawaii a $3 to $4 billion problem, because sometimes we just get so, our energy gets so kind of torn in so many different directions. And so this is the goal that we're trying to do at VI, is to solve this problem. And to do this, I am very fortunate in that I got to meet Tate and Andrea at the Gates Foundation Reinvented Toilet Expo. If you had told me that I was going to be in Reinvented Toilet Expo in Beijing when I was, 10 years ago, I would have said, what? So my career took a big kind of diversion, but this was the problem that we were hoping to solve. And so one of the reasons we partner with these companies is because we realize that we can't do this without the leading technology companies to do this. And so it's a very unconventional approach for a nonprofit to take, but we take a very entrepreneurial outlook of all of us need to come together, policymakers, companies, industry leaders, and the people who work on design flows and everything. And so we have a kind of a loss leader approach, and we ask them to contribute, and LIXIL's just been a great partner, helping with studies, helping us to solve this problem. And so these are some of the innovative technologies that we brought to Hawaii. This was kind of the first of its kind ever in Hawaii. That was introduced by Elgin. I'll talk a little bit more. This group I met at the Gates Foundation. It was a Cinderella company, and they do a incinerating toilet, which my family and friends are the most fascinated by, and they fixate on that. And like, incinerating toilet, tell me more about this. But it can be off-grid, and it's great because it doesn't need any plumbing, and it just produces harmless ash. And so, my friends like to kid and say, fire in the hole. This is one of the many poo puns that come with this territory. And so one of the, I think, kind of leading designs that we're going to need to go for is passive treatment systems that do denitrification. And so we worked with two of the larger companies. This is Infiltrator's Aerofin and Elgin. And it's a layered leach field. I'm not going to get into all of, but it uses, by using sand and wood chips, you have kind of an aeration and a process where you can have denitrification that happens, and that's the main thing that we're trying to do to save our coral reefs. But you can also, most importantly, going back to Sarah's thing, with this higher level of technology, and this is what we're leading towards, we want higher levels of technology so you can reduce the size of the leach field, higher levels of treatment, because that's going to save the homeowners a lot of money. And again, this is a $3 to $4 billion problem for the state, but you can imagine for the homeowner, the idea, Hawaii is one of the most expensive states in the country, and we have people that are just barely making it. And when you ask them to pay, $40,000 to $60,000 for a septic upgrade, they're like, that's not going to happen, I can't do it. So we have to figure out financing, we have to figure out technology. This is another exciting thing that we're doing that was mentioned earlier. It's a pressurized liquid-only system, and so you have, instead of having a leach field, you have a tank, but inside that tank, it's filtering out the solid settle at the bottom. It's only pumping out liquid, so your pipes are much smaller. And so the pump can be it's only a 0.5 horsepower pump. And it can pump to smaller things. It can be trenched on the side of the road instead of digging up streets. In a lot of Hawaii areas, they're very remote. There's only one street going in. And so to dig up that street is going to cause chaos for 6 months if you're doing big gravity pipe. So a lot of the engineering companies, and this is the problem, are always, when you're a hammer, all you see is nails, right? And all they see is big gravity sewer because that's the most expensive form of treatment. So that's what they go for. We've found that you can do it for half the price using alternate systems. And we've actually priced it out using preliminary engineering reports, and it's less than half. So there's a mindset that we have to change. Counties are approached by these big companies. They don't know the field, and they're telling them, you have to do this. And so part of what we're doing is educating communities and saying, you need to ask really hard questions of these engineering companies and the people that are representing you to get the best fit. But this is really exciting for very small remote areas. We are part of a National Science Foundation, and similar to what Tate and Sarah are doing, we're trying to find an above ground model because a lot of our communities are like just they're on lava rock and blue rock, there's very little soil, so you don't have the soil you need for treatment in the drain field. And when you're using just crushed rock, it just percolates right through, and so there's no treatment that you need. And so we're pushing for a higher level of treatment above ground, so you don't have to do all that excavation. And then treat it to such an extent that you can maybe take that cesspool, which normally we just fill up, right? When we do this, we spend a lot of money to dig and to create these drain fields, and then we just fill up with rocks or slurry these old cesspools. That's major infrastructure that's already in the ground. We want to use that and retrofit that cesspool and use it as like a drainage pit. And so if you have a higher level of treatment above ground, you treat it to such a level that, when you can use that retrofitted cesspool, it can just be a seepage pit. So this is really exciting. We can use recycled water for irrigation for firefighting. We're working on, after the Lahaina fires, we're working on this concept of putting green belts around communities and then using 100% of the treated wastewater for irrigation and using the solids, pyrolyzing them, and turning it into biochar that you can use as a soil amendment for that green belt. And then you have a windbreak, fire break, and sedimentation break to protect smaller communities that are prone to fires. So it's really exciting, and we hope to have that done. And then these are kind of parts that have already been talked about during this presentation, but we are desperately kind of seeking new regulations and pushing our Department of Health to say this is going to save the state a lot of money, but it also could lengthen the life of our systems. If they're more right sized, they're going to be more accurate flows, because if they're undersized, they don't work as well. And this is a study that LIXIL did, looking at the states that do reuse, and this is again something that we really have to make sure that we do. We're coming into an age where water security is just getting to be a greater importance, and so as Tate said, we've kind of been very spoiled, and we cannot waste water like we have in the past, and we have to make sure that we're preserving it. So I'll turn it over to Andrea. Mahalo. Mahalo means thank you.
Great. I think, Stuart, I'll just call out one thing that I find so interesting about Hawaii is that on the Big Island, there are a lot of properties that are dependent on rain catchment as their only source of water. And those homes are also subjected to the 200 gallon per bedroom per day design requirement, despite using very, very low levels of water. So it's not just homeowners that have traditionally piped water that are low users. There are other different categories of homes that require even added flexibility around all of this. So I am your last presenter of the day, and then we're going to move on to a discussion. I'm back to talk about a pilot project that LIXIL was involved in the Alabama Black Belt. I'm sorry if you joined my presentation yesterday, this will be somewhat redundant, but it definitely speaks to this topic and how we used water efficiency to help seek a variance in Lowndes County, Alabama, to reduce the cost and size of on-site septic systems. So, the Alabama Black Belt, it's extremely challenging environment. One of the key features is that clay soils are endemic to the area, which means that they have a hard time receiving wastewater effluents. When we traveled down there in 2019, it became pretty evident fast that if we put less water into those on-site systems, the receiving soils would have an easier time receiving it. And so we started to conceive of a 100 home pilot with the BBUWP, the Black Belt Wastewater Unincorporated Program, and Ms. Sherry Bradley to combine water efficiency with new on-site sanitation systems. Why water efficiency, right? We've been talking about the impact of low flow fixtures this entire time. I think everybody understands very well the upstream benefits of what water efficiency can do, but we went into this project sort of hypothesizing that there might be downstream benefits as well. And so, so what we did is we rolled this program out to 100 homes. we wanted to prove two things. We wanted to explore whether it had an impact on household water bills every month. Sherry was planning to institute a $20 per month sanitation maintenance fee, and recognizing that that was going to have an impact on homeowners' pocketbooks, we wanted to see if we could somehow alleviate that burden by therefore reducing their water bills every month. So that's one of the things that we wanted to test. And then Sherry realized early on that households in the Black Belt use considerably less water than the Alabama average. And so on the basis of these two things, she came up with the idea of seeking a variance from the State Department of Health to design her septic systems at 100 gallons per bedroom per day instead of 150. So we wanted to explore, and that's the research that we did with Triangle Environmental, what the CapEx benefits might be of that size reduction, and whether it could pay for interior plumbing retrofits and leave something left over to help her reach more people with her funds. So when we started in 2019, it was a volunteer-led program. We worked with the IWISH Foundation, who would come in and do community plumbing challenges for a 1-week period. They'd bring in volunteer plumbers from out of state that would do these plumbing upgrades for homeowners. We plodded along like that for a couple of years and then realized we just weren't moving fast enough. And so LIXIL came in and offered to take over the program, recruit plumbers, train them, employ them, and use a survey from IAPMO and the IWISH Foundation to do plumbing assessments. So we ended up doing these plumbing assessments and retrofits in 78 homes. It was a totally turnkey program. Over 6 months, we completed these 78 households. And we collected data in the meantime. There was also a training component, recognizing that there was a lack of plumbers in the area. It was really important for us to start exposing high school students to the plumbing trade. And so high school students underwent a training program with the IWISH Foundation, and then were employed through this program to shadow the plumbers and help with these retrofits. The solution was, it was a partnership model. Like, we couldn't have done this at all without BBUWP. We didn't have the community capital with local residents, and so BBUWP had an individual who sort of opened doors for us and introduced us to community members. But we really, our relationship evolved over time. We started off as this contributor of fixtures, but eventually ended up introducing other technology solutions into the mix, and ended up becoming an implementation partner. So what was the result? So this is an illustrative graph. This is not based on real data, but it does resemble the data that we saw. We collected before and after water bills from homeowners, and what we found was that prior to the installation of the water efficient fixtures, we were seeing spikes in water usage that exceeded that initial 150 gallon per bedroom design capacity. So we saw spikes occur. It was not often, but it was happening on occasion. And then after the water efficiency measures were implemented, what we saw was a significant lowering of water usage that allowed us to stay below that 100 gallon per bedroom per day threshold. So what this told us was that while low water usage was a driver of being able to secure this variance, the water efficient fixtures were actually really critical in terms of complying with it. We also, through our survey work, we asked people about their water bills. Did you see it go up? Did you see it go down? Has it stayed the same? And 2/3 of them reported that their water bills had gone down. And we calculated this to be around $8 to $10 per month in savings, which represented almost 50% of what their new sanitation system maintenance fee was going to be. So we believe that this program is going to help enable longer term sustainability for this program. We also, through our work with Triangle Environmental, determined that the CapEx savings to BBUWP was somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 per household, which far exceeded the cost of actually implementing the retrofits themselves. So Sherry, who was pulling down federal funding in the form of grants, was able to reach more homes with her limited funds. Like I said, it was really important that this be a turnkey offering, so we did everything from identifying plumbers to offering warranty and liability coverage. It was critical. Sherry was running this program with a cell phone and an Excel spreadsheet for a very long time, and so we wanted to make this as easy as possible. And so we really made the program as comprehensive as it could be. Ooh, sorry about the formatting here, guys. Some key takeaways. We really believe that on-site sanitation systems, they start with the toilet, right? It doesn't start at the pipe outside of the home, and we really need to start thinking about these systems as one holistic water system and not inside the home versus outside the home. Right sizing and water optimization saves money for program implementers, but it also saves money for homeowners. And so we saw this as a win-win, and a new tool that could be put in the toolbox of folks who are really trying to deal with communities that are struggling around issues of affordability or have lots that are difficult to address. Low water usage alone wasn't enough to support this variance, but low water usage and water efficient fixtures were enough to de-risk these peak usage events. Obviously, we are a private sector partner. We did this in a very cost-effective and expedient way, and so part of the benefit to Sherry is that she was able to check off many homes in a short period of time. And finally, we couldn't have done it without her. So when you implement programs like this, it's really critical to engage local organizations. So with that, we are going to transition into a discussion phase because we want to hear from all of you. We want to know what scares you about this, what excites you about this. We have been reading the tea leaves for a bit of time here. We've identified a lot of trends that are occurring. We've identified the problems, a few of the solutions, whether they be technology-based or policy-based. But we also recognize that more research is needed, more studies are needed. We need to take a robust amount of data to regulators to be able to make this case. And so we've posed some discussion topics for today, and we would love to invite all of you to sort of co-think with us and ideate on where we take this from here, right? Like if we do believe that right sizing is a way to improve affordability for homeowners, where do we go next? Who do we engage? What types of data do we need, etc. And then finally, anyone want to jump in? Because we will happily welcome you into our right sizing club. So thank you. Thank you to our great participants. And I guess I'm not, microphone?
Yep.
Is this on? There.
Yeah. So I just wanted to thank you all. It's really great to hear all the work you're doing, all the research. I'm Anne from UNICEF, and I work on very similar challenges, but more in a global context. And so this is very relevant and resonates with what we're doing. But I think you are definitely ahead of the charge in terms of innovating. So I think that's great. And yes, I'd like to jump in. But the question I had was, like, how are you framing? Because at the beginning Kate talked a little bit about, how this is responsive to climate change, and I can see, reduced water usage. There are climate rationale, like benefits to this. But well, I guess this is actually not a great question because I think in the current climate, climate is not a great driver. But in terms of, maybe like from a disaster risk mitigation, or are there federal or state level subsidies that are available to households if you frame this in a way that this is sort of mitigating flood impact or other kind of effects of extreme weather? Mm-hmm. And would that be more compelling then for households to jump into this? Because I do think a lot, not just in rural areas, but there is going to eventually need to be some kind of a shift into more decentralized systems across the board. But how do we make this more compelling to policymakers and look for the kind of financing they might need to make that shift?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody? I have some thoughts. Yeah. I know a little bit about this. Mark. Yeah. So I can just talk about in Eastern Virginia. I think there's a lot of pockets where people are doing different things, and I think one of the things we're talking about is like how do we bring these groups together. I think we were talking about this, it's not like on a national level, but like in Eastern Virginia, it's kind of a nonpartisan issue, and actually we have some conservative support just because of purely tax dollars. Like you're losing this land because you can't permit a septic system on it, and so they're also starting. I mean, we're working with a group there that's like focused in coastal resilience, but they've also like changed the wording to like adaptation because they realize like we're losing this land. So like we work with one government official there who's kind of really ahead of the game, and he's been scooping up property from property owners that can't sell the property. So he's formed a public access authority that they can donate their land and get tax credit. So now he owns, or the entity owns like thousands of acres of waterfront property that he's now thinking about how to do affordable and sustainable housing, but modular homes. So like with modular treatment systems that can, while the land is still above water, be used and then move inland. And so, and then he also is, the EPA SRF funding, he's one of the few that I know that gets that funding and gets it out directly to homeowners. I'm not the best to speak on this, but usually that's at like the utility level, and he's able to take those funds and actually get them like direct grants to homeowners that need to upgrade their septic system. So it's happening, but I think it's happening too like concentrated, and I think there needs to be a larger discussion around that.
And just, I think sometimes you have to build on the positives of this, and so, the idea of the cesspoolation of Hawaii has been something for, decades, and, a lot of people, it's not the sexiest issue. I know that is very surprising to you guys, but, our motto at VI is making sanitation sexy again. That's a joke that I have to clarify sometimes. I think one of the ways you did that and the way we got the governor's support is we need workforce development. And so we pivoted, and even though that was not something we anticipated at all, during the pandemic, Hawaii went from having the lowest employment rate in the entire country to within 2 months having the highest unemployment rate in the entire country because of tourism, right? We were over-reliant on tourism. And so we needed jobs, and so that's been something that has been like a bipartisan issue. It keeps on going, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands, of new jobs. These are green jobs that will be, make a good living, and you're protecting water quality. So I think that's one thing surviving, political kind of, shifts that we're going through right now. And another is just, reminding people, like Tate said, that water and wastewater are just nonpartisan issues. These are very, very basic things, and we have to remind them that a lot of these issues that have been politicized are, they're beyond that. Like, government is supposed to solve problems, and we need to push them in ways that are very, very practical, and you have companies like LIXIL, facilitating this amazing research to show, here's the data that you need, and we can make these changes. They're very practical changes. And I'll just say on another final note, that because you mentioned decentralized solutions, and I think that's really important because as we go forward, a lot of these counties are saying, like, we cannot do the traditional systems that we've done at the municipal level. These things are too expensive. They're hundreds of millions of dollars. And as I learned at the Gates Foundation, they are the definition of a linear economy. We pump, this sewage for miles and miles. We treat it, these huge plants that take so much infrastructure, and then what do we do with it? We pump it out to sea or into a river. I mean, it is the definition of waste. Whereas if we do these these smaller decentralized systems, you can pour a concrete pad and put a treatment package system that can be shipped in a container. And so this can be relevant around the world in places that you all are working. And you have smaller conveyance systems to do it, and so you can reuse that water for creating green belts. And fire prevention is going to become increasingly one of our top concerns. And so it's like using this system to address several issues at once at water reuse, and then you have a completely circular economy. So I think it's really promising that, again, when you have rising challenges, if we're not meeting those challenges, that's where the things start to break down, and so we just need our government and nonprofits and the business sectors to work together to say, we can solve these. They have practical solutions.
I'm Erin. I'm also from LIXIL. I'm not a plant question, I promise. I mean, before we get into the innovative solutions, I think there's something around just the right sizing of the existing solutions that we have with the septic tanks, for example. And so what do you see now that you guys have been steeped in this for, well over a year in the research that's been done? What is the primary barrier? Is it not a priority for government to address? Is it the risk, there's a perceived risk that, reducing the size of the drain fields, introduces a risk that they don't want to be held liable for, but you think about the bedroom data, the water use data, it's all very compelling. It seems like a no-brainer. So what do you guys see as that policy barrier? Why isn't it as simple as us, doing the advocacy work to get that policy changed? So all of you wanted to respond.
I just want to say that in the on-site industry, people are very worried about the organic loading because you're less water but the same amount of poop, and the notion of failure in septic systems is often conflated. But like what Stuart's talking about is mostly environmental failure, okay? It's getting the wastewater and nutrients and the microbes and everything are getting to places they shouldn't be. The other main category of failure is hydraulic failure, okay? And that can be mediated by poor soil, but it can also be mediated by overgrowth of the biomap. In the on-site industry, they're more concerned with potential hydraulic failure mediated by the overgrowth of the biomap. And I think it's a valid technical concern that needs to be studied.
I think as we continue to expand the data, because we've dealt with this on the plumbing side, right, where we had to normalize this right sizing. There was this worry that, hey, we're going to shrink the systems and homes won't have enough water to do what they need to do. And so we certainly needed to present kind of an overabundance of data to show, like, no, you still have the safety factor built in. You can still get the right, achieve these efficiencies. And so I think we need to continue to collect the data. We need to be able to show that while most regulations that are built around these hydraulic loads are still, by right sizing, you still meet the organic loads. And we need to make that connection, I think, a little bit stronger in the research. I also think that it's not a priority for state governments. This is large, and for the federal government. All these regulations take place at the state level in the United States. And so we need, as a community, to be better advocates for this and for the update of these things. And the EPA needs to show a little leadership by updating, their recommendations. And so states have something that they can point to. So it's just not from, the industry itself, which is going to be an important advocate for this, but they're pointing to EPA's data saying, hey, they recognize that EPA's own programs have contributed to this, reduced sizing that we can now benefit from. But unfortunately, it seems like EPA, the only thing they do is celebrate Septic Smart Week, which is great, but we need to take that program a step further.
Another question?
Thank you. And let me start from Siwash, Ethiopia. The context I am from is completely different from this one. I'm really very happy to listen to all this discussion. But there are many commonalities. The commonalities include like lack of access to safely managed sanitation services, and also challenge due to nature, like the subsurface or groundwater or soil type and everything. These are very common in other areas also to deliver safely managed sanitation services. My question is related to water. What I saw actually here is those households who don't have safely managed sanitation services are disconnected from the centralized services. We are talking about sanitation here, which is inseparable from water supply. And what does water supply looks like? Is that still disconnected from the centralized system, or do they use self-supply, which is highly risky because if water table is especially shallow, then there is high probability of groundwater contamination as well. Second one is about trend. The assumption here is every bedroom or houses are fully occupied, but there is always a dynamism. What does the trend look like? Like more people in a single household or less people in a single household, how can we really factor in sizing or designing the infrastructure? Not only the design of not only the sizing, but also the duration of the design period. Sometimes we assume 5 years, 10 years. And there is an argument, if we over-design in terms of design period, if we consider, for example, 25 years instead of 10 years, imagine it is simply about investing more without utilizing maybe for the last 5, 10 years. So how can we really factor in those design parameters in those infrastructures? Thank you.
I can cover a few things.
You had another question, okay.
Yeah, there's a lot in that. I mean, I think the water supply question depends. I mean, you can have, I think it's most common to be on well water, like private well, if you also are on site, but there are cases where you have piped water, but the septic system. So that's highly dependent. I mean, I think a larger discussion is around where we invest money in the management of these systems, because I mean, and I think this applies in countries in Africa where I've seen, investment of like a $200 million wastewater treatment plant that is failing because there's not the operation maintenance. I think one thing I'm seeing here that's shifting, and we were talking about this up in Cape Cod recently, is like there's starting to be a push in comparing the cost of extending sewer versus providing those same households on-site treatment systems. And one of the cool things I'm starting to hear is like, you call them responsible management entities, where like the municipality will take over the management of private residences' separate treatment systems. So I think that kind of, and the cost is starting to, like, sewer is very expensive and hard to maintain. And so I think a lot of what I was talking about is around servicing and management. So I think that's where there's a big opportunity. I think that can travel outside the U.S. as well, in terms of thinking about how the utility can step in and operate and maintain even private residential systems. And I think it brings the standard of the systems up. And oftentimes in the rural areas, they get left, like, it's funny, if you're on sewer, then all of a sudden you're like considered, I don't know, the rural folks that have their own systems kind of get left out and they're not considered, but like, if you can't get a sewer out to people, you should also, like, they should be getting some incentivizing money to like have a properly maintained systems. There's cool things in terms, I think that's a big thing in terms of like how we start to expand and manage distributed or decentralized systems.
Yeah, I think traditionally it was either sewer or individual systems, right? The monkey in the middle and the new kind of evolution of this is these decentralized solutions. And I think that's, partly brought on by a lot of the research of the Gates Foundation, but I think it's going to be very applicable in international situations. And that's why I think the more we can kind of commercialize these and develop these models, they can be taken to different parts where, again, having that responsible management entity that takes ownership of it is going to be crucial. Instead of the old kind of, model of we'll come in and build this and then leave, which is, fail miserably. So, yes.
Yeah, my question is more around in terms of stakeholders. What have you guys seen in terms of developers and home builders? Because from a visibility perspective, that's probably politically maybe a higher visibility in the state. So, just curious.
Well, I mean, I think typically from that development community, they seem to be more supportive. I think it's because, one, it obviously lowers the costs. Anything they can do to lower the cost of homes, they're typically all for. I think they still are faced with the regulatory burden of the sizing, and that's where we're going to have to be a little bit more proactive about addressing. I think too, and this kind of feeds a little bit into their question, is that right now I think there is a lot of innovation that's taking place, both in how we manage systems, the types of technologies, how we approach these decentralized sanitation systems. However, there really is no national strategy for it. And even when we are collecting these wonderful stories, they're still very isolated, and there's no sharing of these best practices. And so I think as we think to develop both kind of a national strategy, there's a role that like EPA needs to play, and I think there's probably, as we look at some of those stakeholders that you were just talking about, some better engagement that we can do with some of their larger national umbrella kind of associations, so that they can get out to their members and saying, hey, there's lots of options here. And just like Stuart found in Hawaii, once communities know the options, then it's, people who are stuck and saying, hey, there's only traditional, you can only get the big pipe, then they have a lot more to talk about. We're like, well, hey, this is actually something that, we could do, and then all of a sudden it opens up a whole new menu that they were unaware of.
I have just an anecdote on the developer thing. So, I think there's a lot of financial opportunities, so I'll just give an anecdote. In North Carolina last year, I think, they adopted, and it was basically one advanced on-site treatment guy pushing this policy. But as you know, like on the coast, especially on the Outer Banks, like real estate is very valuable, and like the amount of home you can put on a piece of land is important. So he got passed, if you have a treatment system that meets an SF 350, which is the non-polymer use standard, IAPMO also has one now, that you don't need a repair field. And so your repair field is like, if you're not familiar, when you put a septic system in, you have your drain field that goes in, and then you also need that same amount of area, square footage of yard, that you kind of have to leave for when your first drain field fails. Now what they're saying is, if you have a treatment system that's putting out high enough quality effluent, now that you're basically saying you're going to extend the life of your current drain field. So now where you had to have yard before you can put house there, and when you're talking like on the Outer Banks, that's huge dollars because they're building condos and renting them out year round. So like developers are super happy about that. So there is starting to be more. It's not just, when we're talking about the bipartisan thing. I mean, dollars speak. I mean, I think there's a pure economic argument for a lot of these changes we're making. The two now, not just have to be climate or philanthropic based. So.
Are you getting pushback from, sorry, just like a follow-up, are you getting pushback from big consulting firms that are used to getting these kind of big construction contracts?
Not directly, not as Stuart has had.
One kind of humorous and exciting thing is kind of what Christopher was talking about was, this big engineering firm that's doing a study went into this small community it's near the ocean, and they said, they did their normal dog and pony show and said, oh, you're going to need this, it's going to cost this, and it's big sewer. And we had been in that community, like really just educating them, and they started firing questions of like, no, we can't do that, this, and they pushed back, and the company was like, wow, we just got ambushed, and it was a really great thing to see a community just fight for itself and say, that's not going to work here, that's way too expensive, and it's not even applicable here because we're so close to the water, and the water table's so low, so you can't do big gravity sewer. And so that's the kind of thing I think is really exciting, is just arming people with this information so that they can make better decisions.
Yeah, I'm curious about the labor force, like the need for training, plumbers, and also I heard that you mentioned about there's a lack of plumbers in, where's the place, sorry?
In Alabama.
In Alabama, for
Yeah.
sure. So we also experienced the same in Texas, El Paso. We work with point of use, water treatment solutions. So there's also like this problem with skilled plumbers there. I mean, so my question is like very broad on like not just the lack of labor force, but also like training aspect, plumbing license, how we include this into their programs.
I can say a little bit, so.
I'll let you talk first.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be our last question, but, so LIXIL actually commissioned another study that looked at plumbing workforce here in the United States, and determined that we are short 500,000 plumbers today. And so there is a massive workforce issue at play here, because we don't have enough folks to do the jobs that already exist, let alone the upskilling that's needed to accommodate these new systems that are coming down the pipeline. There are some workforce activities underway right now. I know Christopher, IAPMO, and myself are involved in a subgroup right now through the BUILD organization. It's part of the Blue Ribbon Commission that's run by San Francisco Water, Paula Kehoe, where we're starting to map sort of labor groups and how they fit across sort of the water treatment and reuse paradigm. We're starting to look at training programs and where gaps exist, because we recognize that we needed to start yesterday, right? Thinking about this. Stewart has a great program in Hawaii right now that's sort of a preliminary training course for on-site treatment system operators, and so there are pockets of workforce development that are starting to take place, but I think through BUILD, we're really gonna try to bring some light to the scale of this issue and where some of those gaps exist and how they can start to be addressed. So it's front of mind, I know, for a lot of people, manufacturers and implementers alike. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming today. This has been wonderful. Feel free to come up and chat with us afterwards if you like.
Thank you.
Yes, what I wanted to ask you, and I checked online.
I think we do need to do a study about this situation.
And I don't know if they had recently. I know in 2020.
Hey guys, can I have a quick picture?
Yeah, let's put it in the other picture.
Mark, we need your, we need your faces.
You lost your voice, Chuck.
I did.
So where do you guys want, oh.
And I gave her
Here,
my
hold
camera,
on.
mine's not the
Well,
best.
maybe
but-
get behind the,
Yeah, which
get in front of the slideshow.
which photo do we want?
Yeah, just put Stuart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is,
Do we have something with the beginning?
yeah, it's not,
Just gets, yeah.
Yeah, this, I think that,
I was just gonna
the
go
right
to
sizing or,
sorry, now I've hit the
that's a
button.
good
Oh,
one, with that
that's a
guy
good one.
sitting in the,
Oh, it's on a lag.
It was a nice figure that I stole.
Yeah, it was.
I was trying to find
I'm
something.
sorry, I hit the
Thank
button
you.
so many times now.
Thank you,
It
you
has
are.
a life of its own here. Ugh. Stop.
We'll just let fate decide.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
Ruth-
fine. Just do that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
We got some
Okay.
data up there. Do we want to be in front of the?
We can be on either side.
Can you get it?
Oh, sorry guys, I was
Yeah.
flipping. They were still messing around with slides.
All right, 1, 2. There we go. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.